Hey there, it's Lara here. It is April 15th. Welcome to this week's weekly video. So these videos go Wednesday to Wednesday. So April 15th to April 21st in this case. But as is often the case, what I talk about in the videos pertains to longer than just the week, right? Sometimes the events, the astrological events, are shorter term, and so they just apply to the, these few days kind of thing. But oftentimes what I'm talking about is something that is a longer term, has a longer term impact. Even in the case of new moons and full moons, those are sort of 2-week periods that also correlate to bigger cycles too. So what we're going to talk about today mainly is Venus, and Venus as she travels through the sign of Gemini. So that's going to be the crux of the conversation here, but we're going to talk about some other things too. If this is your first time to the channel, welcome. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining me. I hope that what I have to say resonates with you. And if that's the case, I'd love it if you let me know by leaving a comment or a thumbs up, or definitely subscribing to the channel, and sharing with other people that you think might be interested in what I'm saying here too. So I like to start with where the moon is at. And the moon is, as I'm recording this, she's transitioning from Capricorn, where she's been for the last 2.5 days, into Aquarius. And this is significant. I talked about this on Facebook. I talked about it in last week's video a bit too. I gave you a heads up and mentioned to you, take note of what's going on for you while the moon is moving through Capricorn, and the very early degrees of Aquarius as well. So that applies to today as well, right? And the reason for that is because, there's obviously a lot going on in Capricorn with Saturn. Saturn just moved out, but Saturn and Pluto conjuncted in Capricorn earlier this year, and we are still feeling the impact of that. We will feel the impact of that throughout the year. And then we've also got Jupiter there with Pluto still in Capricorn, who just made their first of 3 conjunctions, right? Coming together as a conjunction for the year. That's going to happen 2 more times in June and November, or July 1st, I think, and then November. And we have some other energy in Capricorn as well. And then Saturn has moved on into Aquarius, the very early degrees of Aquarius, first degree of Aquarius, where it will be for a few months and then retrograde back into Capricorn for a little bit before moving on into Aquarius and having a close conversation with Jupiter later on this year around the time of the solstice. So that's why I'm saying the latter degrees of Capricorn, early degrees of Aquarius are triggering a lot of big things. And that's happening on the world stage. We can see it happening, obviously. And it's also happening on a personal level in our lives. And then when we pay attention to the moon, because the moon connects to us and our emotions, right? We feel it personally. So when we pay attention to where the moon is at, we get a feel for what that means for us. And again, I'll remind you, if you haven't, or if it's your first time here and you haven't taken advantage of it, I have something on my website that you can access for free. It's a quick start guide to begin working with the moon. And you can go over there and just give me put in your first name and your email address, and you'll get an email that has the download for the PDF and the audio there, if you're interested in that. And of course, I'm available for readings, as always. So you can check out what's on offer over at my website right now. If there's something you're interested in that you don't see there, then ask me about it, because I often do sort of specialty readings for people. I plan on adding some things there to my website, lots of things in the works, but these things take time, and in the current situation with kids home all day and all that kind of stuff, not as much tends to get done. So anyway, so the moon, let's get back to the moon. Moon is moving from Capricorn to Aquarius. And then on Friday, she's going to be in Pisces over the weekend. And, that can be nice for the weekend, a little gentleness, with the Pisces moon, maybe a little more sensitivity, heightened emotions, even more so with the moon in a water sign, and particularly, Pisces, but also a good time for getting creative, for, watching Netflix, because we haven't been doing enough of that lately, right? And, listening to music or playing music, checking out one of the multitude of free shows online that people are doing, that kind of thing. And then she will move into Aries on, I have it written down wrong here, but I think it's on Monday. I'm going to double check for you though, just so I give you the right info. Just give me a second. She will enter Aries on... on Monday, the 20th. So, and then we're going to have, next week, in next week's video, I will talk to you about the new moon in Taurus that's happening next Wednesday. So that's where the moon is at. And then we have Mercury, who entered Aries on April 11th, and she will remain in Aries until May 11th. So there for a month. And I just called Mercury a she, but actually Mercury is this planet of androgyny. And the reason for that that correlation is because Mercury was the messenger god who was able to move between the worlds, right? The psychopomp, the guide of souls. So Mercury helped guide souls between, the realms. And so we don't necessarily associate Mercury with a gender per se. So, but Mercury will be in Aries on from April 11th already. So already there until the 11th of May. And I touched on this really briefly last week, and I just want to say another word about it here. I was thinking about Mercury in Aries, and what does this imply for us, right? Well, Mercury is the planet of our mind, of our thinking. It's the planet that rules things like communications, ideas, thoughts, the exchange of information, our intellect, this notion of exchange, like commerce even, and short jaunts, trips, and like sort of trips that are not air travel, let's say, like not long distance travel, that kind of thing, right? And moving parts. Mercury rules those sorts of things. So, but it's really, if we're going to boil it down to the core, Mercury is about the mind. And Mercury in Aries, right? Aries is this energy of the warrior, of instinct, of will, of I, me, mine, of initiation and action. And so, and on the shadow side can be, this energy of aggression, right? So Mercury in Aries really, in a couple of words, I think at its best is about mental fortitude and quick sort of instinctual responses, right? And inspired thinking at its best. And so if we want to use the energy of Mercury in Aries to our benefit optimally, then that's what we focus on. If we're not so conscious about it, what can happen is the shadow side of this energy comes out, right? And we have mental battles, whether those be internal, although Mercury's not in retrograde, so tends to be more of sort of an outward energy. But we can have mental battles, verbal battles with other people on the internet. We see things like, internet trolls, or we just get in heated exchanges with people, reactionary responses to things, like knee-jerk reactions where we're like blurting out something without thinking about it first, impulsive communication sort of thing. So we need to be mindful of that, and mindful of the fact that communication is a two-way street, right? And it's not always about just what I think and what I want and what's, my opinion sort of thing. So be mindful of that. And also, I would say, like, even though Mercury's not retrograde, and when it's retrograde, it tends to be more of an internal energy, but because we're all sort of trapped at home, and many of us are alone right now, there can be a lot of thinking going on, right? And a lot of internal dialogue that happens. And so just be mindful of not being aggressive with yourself and the way you're talking to yourself, right? That's something to be mindful of your internal dialogue, I think, around this time. So that's what's going on with Mercury. And then we have on May, well, first of all, let's just touch on, Venus entering Gemini. So Venus entered the sign of Gemini on April 3rd. And she is going to be there until August 7th. This is a long haul journey for Venus. And the reason that it's such a long trip through Gemini this time is because Venus is going to retrograde there. And that's happening on May 13th. And the retrograde goes until June 25th, when Mercury will station direct at about 5 degrees Gemini. But we're going to come back to all of this in a minute and focus on it in more detail. But I wanted to mention that here because I'm kind of going chronologically. Then on May 5th, which seems like a long time from now, but it isn't really, the nodal axis, the nodes of the moon change signs. This is significant, and we're going to talk about it in more detail closer to the date. But I'm mentioning it here because the nodes are moving from Capricorn and Cancer, where they have been, to Gemini and Sagittarius. And obviously, so we're going to have the North Node moving from Cancer to Gemini. And this is significant, because we're going to be talking about Gemini a lot in today's video, and Venus being there. And so just be mindful of that these themes are going to be part of a larger picture for all of us, with the North Node moving in. And the North Node the nodes stay in the signs, right? They're always opposite the sky from each other. They stay in those signs for about 18 months kind of thing. And that will be where the eclipses, the next sort of family of eclipses take place, because the nodes of the moon are implicated in the eclipses, right? So just take note of the themes that we're talking about in relation to Gemini, because this will be part of the bigger picture moving forward for all of us. And again, I'll talk about that more in a future video, but I just wanted to mention it here. And then the last thing I want to say before we circle back to Venus and Gemini is that the sun is changing signs this week. So the sun is entering Taurus on Sunday the 19th. So happy birthday if you're a Taurus sun sign. And when the sun moves into Taurus, the sun is about our will and what we radiate, right? From our heart. It's our center, it's our consciousness, our ego, what we're consciously sort of aware of and enacting, sort of thing. So the sun is moving into Taurus, which is a fixed earth energy. And Taurus is very concerned with stability, with our survival needs, getting our basic needs met. And Taurus is concerned with resources. So like, our money, our time, and our energy as well. And very much connected to the five senses, you know, the material world, the world of the five senses, and what we experience and how we experience pleasure through our senses. So those are Taurus themes. So when the sun is moving through Taurus, for all of us, these things get highlighted, right? So there is this, you know, we may find ourselves feeling more determined with the sun in Taurus, right? A fixed energy, more focused on security. It's interesting because I think there's a lot of focus on food security right now, which is a very Taurus theme. A lot of changes happening there with Uranus and Taurus right now, transiting Taurus for years to come. And, you know, I think a lot of people, like, we are planning a garden for the first time. We used to have a garden. When we moved into our house, we planted a garden and we had it for a while, quite a few years. And then we got rid of it because we had little kids at the time. And then we had a camp that we were going to in the summer, you know, which we still have, but can't go there right now. So we got rid of it. And now we've decided we're going to, you know, bring back the garden. And I think a lot of people are doing that right now. So this focus on food security, on self-sustainability, you know, getting our basic needs met, focusing on the simple pleasures as well, right? Because we've had to kind of bring it on down to that in these times right now. And then the shadow side, you know, that we may experience with Taurus energy is really kind of clinging to things, you know, hanging on to things, whether they be material possessions, people, you know, just our money, things. And, you know, we do that sort of out of the sphere of not getting our needs met. And also a risk of being very sort of stubbornly stuck in place. Now, of course, I know we have to be stuck in place right now with the, you know, the measures that are being taken, social distancing and isolation and that sort of thing right now. But I'm talking more about sort of resisting change, resisting anything that's not familiar to us. And I think right now it's important for us to be adaptable, right? And the mutable signs, so this Venus and Gemini energy and the nodes shifting into the mutable signs, right? Gemini, Sagittarius, Neptune in the mutable sign of Pisces, who's factoring into this Venus retrograde as well, are sort of showing us and, you know, tweaking us to the fact that adaptability is quite important right now. So with that, I will segue into talking more about Venus and Gemini. So Venus, as I mentioned to you, she moved into the sign of Gemini on April 3rd, and she's there for a long haul until August 7th because of the retrograde. So she's retrograding from May 13th to June 25th. And but right now, as I'm recording this video, she's in her shadow period, right? Shadow phase, because she is in an area of the sky that she's going to revisit when she goes retrograde. And so the first thing I'll say was that the last Venus retrograde happened in October of 2018 in Scorpio. And the last Venus in Gemini retrograde happened in 2012. And before that, it was 2004. So you can think back to what was coming up for you then, right? In terms of Venusian themes, which we'll get to in a minute. But a little bit more about the Venus cycle I want to say to you. And I know I haven't shown you the chart yet. So actually, let me do that first real quick. And then I'll talk about the Venus cycle. So here's the chart. And you can see where we've got Venus down here, because really this is our focus in Gemini. And right now at about 9 degrees, right? So she's going to come back to this because she's going to go all the way back to 5 degrees once she retrogrades. So Venus and Gemini there. And of course, just, you know, to reiterate, as if we need this point driven home again, all of the energy in Capricorn that's going on And still, like in this square, look at this. It looks like a toddler used a red crayon or a red marker to scribble. All of this red heated friction going on between, Capricorn and Aries, which I've spoken about before. There we have Neptune and Pisces. Spoken about that before. I mentioned where the moon is at. There's Saturn at 1 degree Aquarius now, right? Which we talked about. And Uranus and Taurus down here. So, but take note of Venus in Gemini, and also take note of Neptune in Pisces, because these two energies during the retrograde or during Venus's transit through Gemini will be squaring each other. Oh, and the last thing is there right now. So there's the North Node at 1 degree Cancer, about to tip into Gemini. The nodes of the moon always move in retrograde. So it will move into Gemini on May 5th. And then the South Node up here in Capricorn will move into Sagittarius. Okay, so that's the chart in my analog way of showing you. And let's get back to Venus cycle here. So the Venus cycle, every Venus cycle is about 1.6 years long. So 584 days, right? And the cycle begins when Venus and the Sun meet up in what it's called an inferior conjunction. So that is when the planet, in this case Venus, is traveling between the Earth and the Sun, and they all line up in a conjunction, right? So this is going to be, this conjunction, inferior conjunction, is happening at 13 degrees Gemini. So that's a trigger point sort of thing, if you will, right? And that's happening around June 3rd. But why this is important and why I'm bringing this up to you here is because it is the beginning of a new cycle, of a new Venus cycle, beginning of a new phase. So if you think of it like the moon cycles, it's a very similar idea, right? At a new moon, the sun and the moon are conjunct each other. So here we have Venus, the sun, and the earth lining up at a conjunction. Beginning of a new cycle, planting of new seeds, a new phase beginning, right? And in regards, in this case, to Venusian themes. And then as Venus, carries on her journey, we'll reach sort of the full moon phase of the Venus journey, if you will, in March of 2021, when there's more of this kind of full moon, like energy of culmination, things coming to fruition, things bearing fruit, even sort of endings and release points as well. But that's far off. So right now, we're talking about the beginning of the cycle. And so it's important, I think, to focus on this Venus in Gemini and the Venus retrograde cycle. So Venus is about, I keep referring to Venusian themes. Well, what does that mean? Venus is about our relationships. And I'm talking about all kinds of relationships here. I'm just not talking about your significant other, your marriage partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, somebody you have a crush on. That's not just what I'm talking about. I'm talking about all kinds of relationships. We are in relationship constantly to everyone and everything, including ourselves. So Venus is about relationship. Venus is about pleasure, what brings us pleasure, what we desire, what we magnetize towards ourselves, what we are drawn to. It's about our resources, right? And getting our basic needs met, and the world of the five senses. Venus rules Taurus and Libra. So she is also about this idea of harmony and balance, and beauty, right? We tend to think of something as being beautiful when it is harmonious to the eye, kind of thing. So those are all the themes Venus brings up for us. And when she's in Gemini, right? Gemini is an air sign, a mutable air sign, about curiosity and intellect, and ruled by Mercury, about the exchange of ideas and information, very much about socializing. Gemini loves to be social. And I always think of Gemini as being, you know, I always use this analogy of like the hummingbird going from flower to flower and collecting information, or, you know, chit-chatting and then moving on, sort of thing. Gemini is this energy also of this, you know, twin energy of paradox kind of thing, of on the shadow side, you can think of this as being two-faced, right? Which isn't, you know, a nice word, but on the shadow side, Gemini can be that way, or very quickly changing the mind based on who they're talking to or the information coming in. But very, very sort of mentally stimulated, very intellectual, very social energy. So when we bring these ideas together, then this brings about a lot of sort of thinking, or in the case of Venus retrograde, the energy moves more inward, right? So rethinking about what we value. Venus, very much about what we value, about what's important to us, what we desire, about our relationships, about beauty and aesthetic, and all of these kinds of things, right? These are the themes that get highlighted for us with Venus and Gemini. And as Venus moves through Gemini, she's going to square Neptune in Pisces, right? A square is a conversation of tension where we need to act to relieve the tension, or it brings about some kind of challenge, or the impetus to act. Squares can help us get things done if we respond appropriately, right? So she's going to square Neptune in Pisces 3 times, on May 3rd, on the 27th, and again on July 27th. And so that will highlight this sort of notion of the ideal Neptune versus the real, right? And I think the need for boundaries, or issues around boundaries, may come up. And you've heard me talk about Neptune before in relation to the current situation. Mercury was in Pisces, where Neptune is, and Neptune rules Pisces for a long time, where we saw the spread, lack of boundaries, of this virus pandemic, which is very much a Neptunian, Piscean kind of, or Mercury in Pisces theme as well. So, wherever Pisces is in your chart, will be squaring this Venus in Gemini energy. And so those two areas of the chart will be in tension on and off over the course of Venus moving through Gemini. And the last thing I say before I go through each of the signs and tell you where this is happening for you is that Venus retrograde, it will feel the most sort of intense for the mutable signs because it's happening in a mutable sign. So those mutable signs are Gemini, Sagittarius, Virgo, and Pisces, and particularly, around the retrograde points, but those signs in general. And then it may feel challenging for the fixed signs of Leo and Aquarius, Taurus and Scorpio. And I say that because fixed energy is just that, it's fixed, right? Whereas this is happening in mutable signs, and mutable signs are known for their adaptability. Whereas fixed signs don't really love change that much. So it can feel a little bit more challenging. So I'm going to go through each of the signs. And remember, or if you haven't been here before and heard me say this, we're speaking to first and foremost rising sign, okay? In these general sort of forecast videos, that will be the most accurate, the most obvious. And then you can also listen for your sun sign and your moon sign for added layers of information. But if you don't know your rising sign or your ascendant sign, you can find that out by having a reading, or you can find it out by looking up your own chart on a free site like astro.com. But you need a birth time to know your rising sign, a fairly accurate one. So Venus and Gemini, including the retrograde period, right? Which is moving these energies that I'm talking about inward, where we're sort of rethinking about these things and perhaps thinking about our relationship to self as well, but our relationship to what we love, who we are in relationship with, our relationship to what we value, all of these things, right? Being highlighted over this long haul period. So Venus in Gemini, and keeping in mind, this is also where the North Node is entering on May 5th in Gemini. And, you'll also have the Neptune and Pisces energy squaring that. So I don't know. I'll briefly mention what house that's happening, that Neptune square is coming from, but I won't really touch on those themes so much because I don't really have time. But we're going to start with Gemini. So Gemini, for you, obviously, Venus is moving through your sign for quite a while, and we'll be retrograding there, right? And so this is all about the the themes that the Venusian themes that I spoke about, relating and beauty and aesthetic and what we value and what we desire and all of that, with regards to you, yourself, right? First house. So this can be about your physical body, your physical health and vitality. And it can be about how you project yourself out into the world, how you appear, how you respond to, the outside world. And then this is squaring your 10th house, where Neptune is in your 10th house, squaring this energy. Remember, I said Neptune is going to square 3 times Venus over the course of this transit. So that 10th house is about your career, your public reputation and persona, your the legacy you wish to leave, your relationship to authority, these kinds of things. So that's what's going on for you, Gemini. Moving on to Taurus, we've got Venus transiting your 2nd house of Gemini. So this highlights your resources. It highlights your need for stability. And when I say your resources, your personal resources, like your money, your material possessions, your time, your energy, it's about your skills, the skills and talents you use to, make money and sustain yourself and get your needs met. It's about what you value, and it's about, things you place worth on, and your self-worth, right? How much you value yourself as well. And so for you, these are the themes being highlighted. Obviously, Venus is your ruling sign, Taurus. So this will hit home for you, in a big way. And then you've got Neptune and Pisces squaring this, which is sitting in your 11th house 3 times over the course of this transit, right? So the 11th house speaks to your friendship groups, clubs, organizations, networks, even, and especially in this time we're in right now, relationships happening over the internet, reaching out to wide groups of people via the internet, networking that way. Also, this is about your hopes and dreams for the future, right? And things that can help you gain for the future as well. So, but that's in square to the 2nd house energy. So that's what's going on for you, Taurus. And moving on to Aries. Aries, this Venus transit is happening through your 3rd house of communications, of your immediate environment, right? So people in your immediate environment often involves like peers, teammates, siblings, cousins, neighbors, community members, this sort of thing, and your daily interactions and the way you communicate. This can have to do even with things like early learning. So learning the basics, right? And so that's where Venus is transiting. And then that Neptune in Pisces square is coming from your 12th house, which is about what goes on behind closed doors when you're tucked away from the world, which so many of us are right now. It has to do with how you can sabotage yourself sometimes, and those sort of bad habits. It has to do with your connection with spirit and higher power, and your communication that happens, you know, sort of in the dream world or in unspoken ways, in non-traditional ways, shall we say. And quite literally, it can have to do with places that are tucked away from the world that we think about it as, you know, hospitals, spiritual retreat centers, prisons, rehab facilities, youth detention centers, these kinds of things, right? So that's what's going on for you, Aries. Moving to Pisces, the Venus transit's happening in your 4th house. So this is transiting your house of home and family and your roots and your literal place of living, and it can have to do with real estate. It can have to do with female figures, nurturing figures, mother energy, your sense of emotional security. So this is Venus moving through here and retrograding here for you, Pisces. And then that square from Neptune is happening in your 1st house, right? From your 1st house of the self, because that's Neptune's in your sign right now. So, you know, this tension from the 1st house of the self and your physical health and wellness, physical body, how you project out into the world, how you respond to the world, issues around, you know, the self in general. So that's what's going on for you, Pisces. Moving to Aquarius, you've got Venus moving through your 5th house. So this transit is highlighting issues of children, of, you know, whether they be your children or children that you're associated with in some way or that you work with, issues around childbearing, you know, pregnancy, this kind of thing, issues around your creativity, and how you shine your light into the world, your individual creative self-expression, creative projects, what brings you pleasure and joy, and romance. These kinds of things are being highlighted for you with Venus there. And then the square from Neptune in Pisces is coming from your 2nd house of what you value, your resources, right? Time, money, energy, material possessions, of what makes you feel sort of safe and secure in a material way. It has to do with using your skills and talents, right, to make money and that kind of thing. And it has to do with valuing the self, right, self-worth as well. So that's where the tension's coming from for you, Aquarius. Moving on to Capricorn. Capricorn, you've got Venus transiting your 6th house of your daily routine and the things you do on the day-to-day and the checking off the ticky boxes, right, on the day-to-day. It can have to do with work tasks, you know, your work environment, and that can be paid or unpaid work. The daily grind is the 6th house, really. And it also speaks to relationships between, you know, unequal. So employee-employer kind of relationships would be one example. This can have to do with pets in the 6th house as well, and how you are in service in general. So that's where Venus is transiting for you. And then you're having this square from Neptune in Pisces, which is coming from the 3rd house of communications, of early learning. So sort of learning the basics, you know, elementary kind of school or any kind of learning the basics, early learning. It also has to do with communications, if I didn't say that yet. It has to do with your immediate environment, and the people in your immediate environment, right? So that's what's going on there for you, Capricorn. For sure, listen to the intro for the nuts and bolts. And then we're going to move to Sagittarius. The Venus transit is moving through your 7th house of one-to-one relationships, close personal relationships, right? Whether that be a significant other, like a marriage partner, or, you know, a close family member or friend or a business partner or a rival even. This 7th house also speaks to contracts and obligations, so contractual agreements, that sort of thing. So this is where Venus is moving through for you. And then there is a square happening from Neptune and Pisces in your 4th house, right? I spoke about this in the intro. But so this 4th house, where the tension's coming from, could be this has to do with your emotional sense of security. It has to do with your home, your family, your place of living, real estate, your relationship to mother figures. this kind of thing, right? So that's what's going on for you, Sag. And then moving to Scorpio, where you have Venus transiting your 8th house, Scorpio. And this is all about your intimate relationships, the people you bare your soul to, or those things that make you feel vulnerable. And this includes shared resources, right? The resources that you share with others. So it can be with a partner. It can involve things like taxes and insurance and bursaries and loans and debt, and wills and inheritance, and all of this can be highlighted around this time. It also has to do with anything like sort of deep psychology and psychological healing and wounding, right? It is home in the 4th house or the 8th house as well. And then the tension is coming from the 5th house of your creativity, how you shine your light, creative projects, children, whether they be yours or children you're associated with, issues around children, what brings you pleasure and joy, romance, those kinds of things, right? So that's where the square is coming from. So that's for you, Scorpio. Next, we've got Libra, where the transit of Venus is happening in your 9th house. And this has to do with your philosophy, your belief system, your worldview, your sort of big picture thinking and vision. It has to do with also higher learning, so learning beyond the basics. It has to do with travel, usually of the long distance variety, and that can even be armchair travel, right? And it speaks to really things that you learn from foreign people and places as well. So that's what Venus is highlighting for you. And then the square is coming from your 6th house of the daily grind, of the tasks you do on the day-to-day, your work tasks, whether they be paid or unpaid, how you are in service. It can have to do with pets as well. I always like to remind people. And it can have to do with relationships of unequals, right? So subordinates, that kind of thing. So that's what's happening for you, Libra. And next we have Virgo, where Venus is transiting your 10th house. So, a very public area of life, of the chart. Your 10th house is about your career ambitions, your worldly ambitions, how you are seen in public. It is about the legacy you wish to leave. It's about your relationship to authority, including your own authority. It is about your public reputation and persona and status and those kinds of things. And the square is coming from Neptune and Pisces in your 7th house of one-to-one relationships, right? Those close personal relationships and any contractual obligations and agreements. So, or rivals, 7th house as well. So that's what's going on for you, Virgo. Please listen to the intro for all the details. And then next we have Leo. Leo, Venus is transiting your 11th house during this time. And your 11th house has to do with your connections in terms of groups generally, right? So friendship groups, clubs, associations, organizations, networks, including online networks, how you sort of spread your message to the larger group. It has to do with your hopes and dreams for the future and the people who can help you attain that are walking the same path as you. So that's the area of the chart that Venus is moving through for you, Leo. And then you've got this square from Neptune and Pisces. So the tension from the 8th house, right? And in this case, it has to do with other people's resources. So resources that you share with other people, time, money, energy shared with others, including those practical things like insurance and taxes and debt and all of that. It has to do with your deep psychological wounding and healing, right? Issues around that. And those vulnerable, intimate sort of connections as well. So that's for you, Leo. And last but not least, in this case, we have Cancer. And Cancer, the Venus transit is happening in your 12th house, which is a very hidden house. It's what goes on behind closed doors. It's how you may self-sabotage. It's your relationship to your spiritual, world and well-being in that sense. It is involving places like hospitals and hospices and spiritual retreat centers and rehabilitation facilities and detention facilities, all of these kinds of things, right? And this may be very much about you just kind of, you know, really cocooning, as Cancer likes to do sometimes anyway, but really closing yourself off, right? And sort of what's going on behind the scenes for you. And then the square, that tension is coming from the ninth house of your belief system, your philosophy, your worldview, you know, sort of higher, anything involving higher learning beyond the basics, travel, long distance travel, armchair travel, things that you learned from people who are different from you, right? People in places that are different from you. So listen to the introduction for all the nuts and bolts, definitely. So that's all 12 signs. And there's a lot more I could say about this. If you have any questions, please ask me in the comments below or reach out to me in another way, right? Via email or Facebook or whatever. And I'd happily answer those for you. But I'm going to leave you here. I hope you're doing well. I'll catch you next week or possibly before. And really take care of yourself. You know, find ways to nurture yourself through this very difficult period that we're all in. All right. Take care. Talk soon. Bye-bye.